At my husband's funeral, a woman in black approached me and said, "Did you know he had another wife and 2 daughters?" I turned pale, but we had been married for 40 years. We had 2 sons. "I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled." I used to believe that a long marriage built its own kind of quiet gravity, something steady, something you didn't have to question. After 40 years with Daniel, I thought I understood every contour of his habits. His rhythms had become the background music of my days. The clink of his mug in the morning, the soft sigh he made settling into his recliner, the way he always loosened his tie before he even kissed me hello. For decades, that sameness had felt like safety. And yet, even before the funeral, before the woman in black approached me, I had noticed small ruptures in that steady pattern, little tremors that I'd ignored because I was tired, or because he'd retired, or because life simply becomes messier after 60. But now looking back, I wondered, were they warnings? One of the first was the phone. He began keeping it face down. Daniel was never the type to hide anything. He used to hand me his phone without even unlocking it. But in the last year, he would slide it into his pocket the moment I entered a room. Once, when it buzzed late at night, he took it into the hallway, speaking so quietly I couldn't make out a single word. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to tell myself it was harmless. Another time, he canceled our Sunday breakfast with the boys. He claimed he was feeling under the weather, but I saw the way he kept glancing at the clock. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, my coffee growing cold, and asked myself, since when does he cancel time with our sons? But I pushed that thought away too. People do strange things at the end of their lives. I told myself that. I believed it. Or maybe I needed to believe it. The morning of the funeral felt unreal. The house was silent in a way that made my ears ache. Our sons, Michael and Trevor, had slept over to help me get through the day. They were already dressed and waiting when I came downstairs. They looked too grown, too somber. I kept thinking how proud their father had been of them. When we arrived at the funeral home, everything smelled faintly of lilies and cold air. People hugged me, offered condolences, spoke about Daniel with soft nostalgia. I stood there, nodding, trying to stay steady. I kept expecting to hear his voice behind me, some joke about traffic or an aside about someone's terrible tie. It never came. I don't even remember the woman in black entering the room. She simply appeared at my side, as though she'd emerged from a shadow. She had dark hair pulled tightly back, a face composed like she'd rehearsed the expression she wanted to wear. Her dress was simple but expensive, and she didn't touch my arm the way others had. She just leaned in. "Did you know," she asked softly, "that he left behind another wife and 2 daughters?" For a second, her words didn't make sense. Another wife? 2 daughters? My hands went numb. I felt the room tilting, the hum of conversations fading. I stared at her, but she didn't look away. She didn't stutter or apologize. She simply waited, like she had delivered a fact and expected me to file it away. Behind her, I saw my sons talking to guests, unaware, and for one horrifying moment, I wondered if I was the fool in the room, if everyone else knew something I didn't. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. "What did you say?" "You heard me," she murmured. Then she stepped back and walked away as quietly as she had appeared, disappearing into the crowd. I stood frozen. My breath caught in my throat. The edges of my vision blurred. Someone approached, asking if I needed water, but I shook my head. Had Daniel cheated? For how long? Who was she? Was she lying? Was she unwell? Jealous? Confused? I needed answers, but every question felt dangerous, like tugging the wrong thread could unravel the entire tapestry of my life. After the service, while the boys loaded flowers into the car, I found myself searching for her face among the guests. But she was gone. In the weeks before his death, Daniel had taken several unplanned trips to visit an old friend. He'd forgotten his watch twice. He'd come home once smelling faintly of perfume, a clean scent, not mine. I remembered asking him about it, and he'd laughed, brushing it off. Probably from that sales clerk at the travel store. She practically hugged me into buying a suitcase. At the time, I had believed him, but now I heard her voice again. Another wife and 2 daughters. Back home after the reception, I sat in Daniel's study, staring at the old wooden desk he'd kept impeccably organized. His handwriting on sticky notes, his fountain pen resting exactly where he'd left it, his paper calendar with trips marked in small, neat letters. Trips I had never questioned. How had I missed so much? Or had I convinced myself not to see it? The house felt colder than usual. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the shifting of the floorboards, made me jump. The boys moved quietly through the rooms, giving me space, unaware that their mother was sitting on the edge of a revelation that threatened to undo decades of faith. I opened his desk drawer, receipts, warranty papers, tax documents, normal things, familiar things, nothing explosive. But even as I closed the drawer, I felt it, a faint, growing certainty. The woman hadn't lied. Not completely. Something had been wrong. Something Daniel had kept from me. And now, with him gone, whatever truth he had buried would have consequences, not just for me, but for my sons. I exhaled slowly. If there was another family, they wouldn't stay hidden for long. And whatever came next, I realized with a quiet chill, my life before the funeral had already ended. This was the beginning of something else, something darker, something I hadn't chosen but now had to face. For the first few days after the funeral, I moved through the house like a ghost. I kept expecting Daniel to walk in, to ask what I wanted for dinner, to complain that the thermostat was 2 degrees too low. Grief had its own rhythm, slow, heavy, suffocating. But beneath it, something else pressed against my ribs, a creeping dread that the woman in black had spoken the truth. I didn't tell the boys. Not yet. They were grieving their father, and I couldn't bring myself to add suspicion to their pain. But every time they asked, "Mom, you okay?" I felt the lie settle on my tongue. One morning, when the house was finally quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad in front of me. I tried to make a list, something I could hold on to, something that made sense. Counting losses felt like trying to count raindrops, but I needed to see the damage on paper. Financial, emotional, legal, social. 4 columns, 4 ways my life might break apart. Financially, I didn't yet know what I was up against. If Daniel had another wife, legally or not, it meant secrets. It meant money going somewhere I didn't know, and secrets always left receipts. Emotionally, I was already drowning. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sudden doubt about everything I thought I knew, it all pressed down like weight on my chest. I'd spent 40 years believing in a man who might have lived a second life, and legally, God. I wasn't naive. I'd watched enough friends navigate the courts after their husbands died to know that anything, absolutely anything, could turn into a fight. Especially if there were children involved. Especially if there were claims. Socially, the idea made me queasy. The whispers, the questions, the little looks people gave when they pretended not to be curious. I closed my eyes and took a breath. I couldn't live in paralysis. If I wanted answers, I needed to take the first step. But what step? That night, after the boys went home, I walked through Daniel's study again. The air felt stale, like the room had been sealed off from the world. His scent still lingered on the leather chair. I stood there for a long moment before forcing myself to open the bottom drawer, the one he always kept locked. The key had been on his key ring, and I had stared at it for days before finding the courage to use it. Inside, I expected, something dramatic, something undeniable. Instead, there were just folders, neatly labeled, impersonal. But one thing caught my eye, a small envelope tucked behind a stack of old insurance policies. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It wasn't addressed. No name, no date, nothing to hint at what was inside. I opened it carefully. 3 receipts slipped out. Hotel stays, each one in a different city, each one on a date when Daniel had claimed to be visiting an old friend. 2 were paid in cash. The third had his credit card number blacked out with pen, which only made it worse. Who goes through the trouble of hiding a number on a receipt they kept? I felt something cold settle inside me. There it was, not proof of a second family, not yet, but proof of secrecy, proof of trips he didn't want me to know about. I sat down hard on the chair and stared at the receipts until the lettering blurred. Was this what the woman in black had meant? Was she part of that hidden life? Or was she simply cruel, or mistaken, or vindictive? I replayed her face in my mind. No tremor, no hesitation. She had spoken as though she was delivering a fact Daniel had left behind for me to discover. A second wife, 2 daughters. The thought made my stomach twist. Late that night, as the house groaned and settled around me, I made a decision. I was done reacting. I would act. The next morning, I called the attorney who had handled Daniel's will 5 years earlier. His secretary told me he had retired. Of course he had. Life didn't give me easy answers, so I sat at the kitchen table again, this time with my laptop. I searched for estate attorneys, scribbling names and numbers. After an hour, I chose one. A woman named Sandra Ralston, highly reviewed, known for complex inheritance cases. The phrase alone made my throat tighten. I scheduled a consultation for the following Tuesday. It felt like the first real step, but taking that step didn't erase the fear. It amplified it. Because now the questions weren't just questions. They were possibilities. And each possibility carried consequences. That afternoon, Trevor stopped by to check on me. I hid the legal pad under a stack of cookbooks on the counter. He hugged me gently. "You sure you're doing okay?" "I'm managing," I said, but he tilted his head. "You look like you're carrying something heavy, Mom." I swallowed. My son had always been perceptive. Too perceptive. "I just miss him," I whispered, and it was true. But it wasn't the full truth. When he finally left, I stood in the doorway and watched his car disappear down the street. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had been too afraid to voice. If I found out everything, would my sons still recognize the man they had loved? Would they blame me or him? The legal pad on the counter felt like a weight dragging the whole kitchen downward. That evening, I rechecked our bank statements for the past 2 years. I had never been the one to handle finances. Daniel insisted he had a system. Now, scrolling through, that system looked like a maze. Transfers, cash withdrawals, an account I didn't recognize at first glance. My breath caught when I saw several recurring deposits into something labeled Crescent Savings. I didn't remember us having an account there. I grabbed a pen and wrote the name down. The plan took shape slowly, like something emerging from fog. Meet with the attorney. Request Daniel's full financial history. Investigate Crescent Savings. Identify the woman in black. Protect the boys at all costs. My hand trembled as I wrote the last line, because protection was only possible if I knew what I was protecting them from. I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway, looking at the room where my marriage had lived for decades. I whispered into the stillness, I deserve the truth. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than grief or fear. I felt resolve. The following Tuesday arrived with a gray sky and a cold wind that rattled the windows. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in black whispering those words again. Another wife, 2 daughters. It echoed like a warning and an accusation at the same time. When I pulled into the parking lot outside Sandra Ralston's office, I sat for a moment gripping the steering wheel. It felt absurd that my life could change inside a building that looked so ordinary. Tan brick, tinted windows, a little sign that read, Estate and Family Law. But this was the first official step. And once I crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. A receptionist with a soft voice led me to a small meeting room. I sat at the polished table and folded my hands to stop them from trembling. Sandra entered a few minutes later, a woman in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, with a calm presence that made the room feel less suffocating. She shook my hand, took a seat, and opened a fresh legal pad. "I've read your intake form," she said gently, "but I'd like to hear it in your own words." So I told her, not everything, not the perfume on Daniel's shirt, not the nights I lay awake, but I told her about the woman in black, about the hotel receipts, about Crescent Savings, about my worry that there might be more. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she tapped her pen lightly against the paper. "What you're describing," she said, "could indicate a second household. It could also be unrelated. But either way, the law doesn't tolerate ambiguity. We need clarity." The word clarity sounded both reassuring and terrifying. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "First," she said, "we file requests for Daniel's full financial records, bank accounts, retirement funds, insurance policies, everything. If money was going somewhere, the trail will show it. And if he supported someone else, then they might believe they have a claim. Whether it's valid is another story." I nodded slowly. "Second," Sandra continued, "I'll need names. You mentioned the woman didn't identify herself?" "She didn't," I said. "She just said what she said and walked off. Then we find her. Funeral guests sometimes sign registries. We'll request the list." My stomach tightened. "And if she contacts me?" Sandra folded her hands. "If she's telling the truth, she may already know you're taking steps. People who want something have instincts about these things." The thought chilled me. Was she already watching? Waiting? We signed the paperwork. I gave Sandra access to whatever accounts I could. And when I walked out of her office, the cold air felt sharper than before. That afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store. It was supposed to be a normal errand: milk, bread, coffee. But in the checkout line, I froze. Two women stood near the floral section. One was older, maybe mid-50s, with a severe expression. The other was younger, in her late 20s. They were both dressed in muted clothes, dark coats, understated jewelry, and both were watching me. Not glancing, watching. When our eyes met, the older one whispered something to the younger, and the younger nodded slowly. A shiver ran down my back. Could it be them? His daughters? I looked away quickly, but I felt their gaze burning into me until I walked out of the store. At home, I locked the door behind me. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with an email from Sandra. I've obtained authorization to request Daniel's financial history. Expect updates within the week. I reread the line several times. It felt like stepping onto thin ice. Was I ready for what might surface? That evening, the house felt too silent. I made soup I didn't eat. I wandered from room to room as if looking for something I'd forgotten. When the doorbell rang at 8:15, I nearly dropped the bowl in my hands. Through the peephole, I saw no one, but a small white envelope lay on the doorstep. No stamp, no address. I opened the door cautiously, picked it up, and shut the door quickly behind me. My pulse hammered in my ears. Inside the envelope was a single photograph. Daniel, standing beside the woman in black. It wasn't a romantic pose. They were simply side by side at some kind of outdoor event, but his arm hovered close to her back, as if he was about to guide her forward. The angle of his shoulders was familiar, a posture I recognized from our vacations, our parties, our life. I sank into the nearest chair. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Ask him about Denver." Denver. He had taken 3 old friend trips there in the past 2 years. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Was this proof? Not of marriage, not yet, but of connection, of intimacy, of shared events, enough to confirm the woman wasn't lying. The next morning, I showed the photo to Sandra. She studied it with careful detachment. This, she said, is significant, not legally concrete, but significant. Someone left it at my door, I whispered. They know where I live. They would know anyway, she said calmly, if they were truly part of his life. The implication settled over me like a shadow. We spent the next hour organizing requests. Hotel records, credit card statements, bank transfers. Sandra's confidence steadied me. She guided everything with quiet efficiency, as if she'd seen worse, handled worse, prevailed through worse. Be prepared, she said before I left. If they exist, they may become more active as they sense movement. Active how? I asked. Contact, pressure, manipulation. Grief brings out the worst in people fighting over the same man. The same man. The phrase stung. 2 days later, the first document arrived. A transaction? A monthly transfer. Regular, predictable. $1 to $750 sent for the past 8 years to an account in the name of Lydia Mercer. I stared at the name. A woman I did not know. A woman who had received nearly $2,000 a month from my husband. Money I had never questioned missing. 8 years. The world felt like it was narrowing around me. The air thickened. Sandra rested a hand on the folder. This, she said, is the point of no return. I nodded slowly. Because this wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't grief or imagination. This was proof. The first undeniable proof that my husband had lived a double life. And whoever Lydia Mercer was, she wasn't going to stay in the shadows anymore. The morning after discovering Lydia's name, I woke with a tightness in my chest that felt almost physical. For 8 years, Daniel had sent money to another woman, almost $2,000 a month. That wasn't charity. That wasn't a loan. That was commitment, a secret he had maintained with meticulous consistency. My plan, which had felt steady before, now seemed fragile, exposed. If Lydia existed, if the woman in black spoke the truth, then they knew more about me than I knew about them. And that imbalance made my skin prickle. Still, I had work to do. I sat at the kitchen table, my battlefield now, and spread out the papers Sandra had given me. She instructed me to gather every document Daniel had left behind: tax returns, insurance policies, property records, anything that could reveal hidden trails. By noon, the table was covered in folders and binders, and as I sifted through them, I made notes, circled inconsistencies, marked anything that felt off. It was grueling work, slow, emotionally draining. But for the first time since the funeral, I felt proactive. Not safe, but not helpless either. Around 3 o'clock, my doorbell rang. A sharp, impatient sound. I stiffened. When I opened the door, the older woman from the grocery store stood on my porch, her dark coat buttoned up to the neck, her expression a controlled, calculated calm. Behind her was the younger woman, her posture tense. "Mrs. Hunter?" the older one asked. I nodded slowly. She extended a hand, but her eyes remained cold. "My name is Lydia Mercer." The name hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. Lydia, the recipient of 8 years of hidden payments. She didn't look like a vulnerable, needy woman. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she had a legitimate place in this story. "And this," she added, "is my daughter, Elise." Daughter! One of the daughters the woman in black had mentioned. My throat tightened. Elise didn't offer her hand. She didn't even pretend to smile. "May we come in?" Lydia asked. I hesitated. Every instinct told me no, but training from decades of politeness pushed me toward yes. Before I could answer, Lydia stepped closer. "It would be better for both of us if we talked privately." Better for both of us. I stepped aside reluctantly. They entered without waiting for an invitation. In the living room, Lydia glanced around with an unsettling familiarity, as though confirming details she already knew. Elise remained near the door, arms crossed. "What do you want?" I asked, folding my hands to keep them steady. Lydia's expression softened, but it was a rehearsed softness, a performance. "We're all grieving Daniel," she began. The sound of his name from her lips felt like a slap. "You knew him," I said quietly. "Knew him well." Her chin lifted. "He was my partner for 22 years. 22! Longer than the 8 years of payments. Longer than I could have imagined. That meant overlap, deep overlap with my marriage, my entire life. I steadied my breathing. "And you approached me at the funeral," I said, watching her eyes. "Why?" "To make sure you understood that we exist," she replied. "We didn't want to blindside you later." Later, meaning during the legal process. "Daniel wasn't a cruel man," Lydia continued. "He never intended for us to fight. He supported me and my daughters because we were part of his life." Her voice sharpened. "And we expect that support to continue." There it was, the threat behind the politeness. "I'm working with an attorney," I said carefully. "Anything regarding Daniel's estate will go through her." Lydia's smile chilled me. "We know." Elise finally spoke, her voice low but edged. "You've already started digging. Financial records, bank statements. You think we don't hear things?" My stomach dropped. "How would you hear anything?" Lydia didn't blink. Daniel had friends, people who respected him, men who knew about us. One of them saw you at that office. Word travels quickly in small circles. I froze. They knew I had gone to Sandra. They knew I was investigating. They knew I was preparing to protect my sons. What exactly are you implying? I asked. I'm implying, Lydia said, that if you escalate this, we will escalate too. Daniel intended for all of his children to be taken care of. If you challenge that, you'll make things harder for yourself and for your sons. A direct threat. I felt a tremor of fear, but beneath it, something colder took root. Anger, a steadiness I hadn't expected. This isn't the place for intimidation, I said evenly. If you have legal claims, bring them forward. Otherwise, leave. Lydia's smile faded. Elise took a step forward, but Lydia raised a hand to stop her. We're giving you a chance to handle this quietly, Lydia said. But if you insist on dragging us into court, you'll regret it. Secrets can be shared from both sides. I met her gaze without blinking. Get out of my house! A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Lydia nodded once, sharply. She turned and Elise followed. At the door, Elise glanced back, her eyes burning with something between hatred and fear. We're not going away, she said softly. Then they left. I locked the door behind them, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the deadbolt. For several minutes, I simply leaned against the door, breathing hard. My entire body felt electrified, on edge. The quiet house suddenly seemed full of echoes. Lydia's voice, Elise's threat, Daniel's lies. But I didn't collapse. I didn't panic. Instead, I went to the kitchen, found my phone, and called Sandra. She answered immediately. They came to my house, I said. Lydia and one of her daughters. Already? She murmured. What did they say? I told her. Every word, every look. When I finished, Sandra's tone sharpened. You did the right thing telling them everything goes through me. And the fact that they showed up confirms something important. They're worried. People only threaten when they're afraid of losing something. Losing something like money or legal standing or control. What do I do now? I asked. For the next few days, Sandra said. You rest. Do nothing. Let them stew. Let them think you're shaken. I'll handle the next step. Rest. It sounded like an impossible luxury, but after I hung up, I realized she was right. I needed distance, space to gather strength. The confrontation had drained me. My hands still trembled as I made tea, though I barely tasted it. For the next 3 days, I didn't touch documents. I didn't check emails. I didn't search for clues. I simply stayed quiet, walked slowly through the house, let myself feel exhaustion instead of fighting it. But beneath the fatigue, my resolve hardened. Because now I'd seen Lydia's face, heard her threats, felt the weight of her entitlement. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever came next, I wasn't backing down. During the days that followed, the house felt like a recovery ward. I moved slowly, deliberately, as though any sudden motion might reopen a wound. Sandra had told me to rest, and I obeyed, not because I felt safe, but because I knew Lydia would expect me to make a mistake if I rushed, and I wouldn't give her that. Still, rest didn't mean peace. Every time the phone buzzed, my pulse jumped. Every shadow outside my window made me wonder if someone was watching. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was the knowledge that the day Lydia appeared on my porch, she'd already known far too much about my life. On the third morning, a text arrived from an unknown number. We should talk. It will save everyone time. I stared at the message, feeling the cold outline of the threat inside it. But there was something else, too. A hint of persuasion, as if Lydia had changed tactics. First intimidation, now diplomacy. I didn't answer. An hour later, the phone rang. I ignored it. Then another text appeared. Daniel wanted us to be civil. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Civil? I almost laughed. Civil didn't involve threats on my doorstep. Civil didn't include 22 years of lying behind my back. I blocked the number. That afternoon, while folding laundry, I glanced out the window and noticed a car parked across the street. Beige sedan. Unremarkable. But it had been there since morning. A younger woman sat inside, head down, tapping at her phone. I couldn't be certain, but the profile, the jawline, the posture. It looked like Elise, watching, waiting, taking note of who came and went. Temptation mixed with surveillance. They were trying to see if fear would make me bend. But fear had done its job already. It had sharpened me. Just after sunset, someone knocked on the door. 3 polite taps. Not urgent, not threatening. Too controlled. When I opened it, a man stood outside, mid-50s, clean cut. A slight smile that never reached his eyes. He wore a tailored coat and carried a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Hunter?" he asked warmly. "Yes." "I'm Mark Whitfield. Lydia asked me to reach out. She thought a calmer conversation might help." "Are you her attorney?" I asked flatly. He hesitated half a beat, and that hesitation told me everything. Not officially. Meaning, he was a fixer, a negotiator, someone who dealt in shadows before real attorneys were involved. "I think," he said gently, "we can resolve this without conflict. Lydia doesn't want hostility. She understands you've lost someone. She simply wants security for her daughters. Daniel would have wanted that." The familiar script, the moral framing, Daniel's name used like a lever. "What exactly is security?" I asked. "A cooperative approach," he replied. "A shared distribution of assets. Respect on both sides. If you show goodwill now, we can avoid complications." Complications. The word slithered through the air like a warning. "I already have representation," I said. Whitfield nodded. "Yes, we're aware. But attorneys escalate things. Family doesn't have to." Family. That word hit me like a spark in dry leaves. "Family?" I repeated quietly. "Is that what you call yourselves?" Another half-beat of hesitation. "I'm only here to help you avoid unnecessary pain," he said. "Lydia believes cooperation benefits you too. Think of your sons. The longer this goes on, the more—" I cut him off. "That's enough." He straightened subtly, as though recalibrating. "Tell Lydia," I said calmly, "that the next time she wants to communicate, she can speak to my attorney, not to me and not through hired messengers. And if her daughters sit in cars outside my house again, I will call the police." His eyes tightened just slightly. "You're making this adversarial," he murmured. "No," I said. "Your side did that on the day you showed up uninvited." The coldness in my voice surprised even me. Something inside had settled, like a lake freezing over. Whitfield exhaled quietly. "Very well, we'll be in touch." He turned and walked down the driveway, his shoes crunching over gravel. The beige sedan across the street pulled away seconds after he left. They were watching. They were taking notes. But they were retreating for now. That night, for the first time in days, I couldn't stay in the house. The silence pressed too hard against my ears. I needed a human voice that wasn't trying to manipulate me, so I grabbed my coat and drove to Mary Ann's house, a friend I'd known for more than 20 years. She'd been at the funeral. She had hugged me fiercely but hadn't asked questions. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't speak. She simply stepped aside, letting me walk in. I sank onto her sofa, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. "I found something," I whispered, and then people came. Piece by piece, I told her everything. The woman at the funeral, the payments, Lydia's threats, Elise watching the house, Whitfield's visit. As the story unfolded, Mary Ann's expression shifted from shock to anger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked gently. "You shouldn't be going through this alone." "I wasn't sure anyone would believe me," I admitted. "Oh, I believe you," she said, "because I've seen this kind of thing before. Men leading double lives, women cleaning up the mess afterward. You're not crazy, and you're not imagining their intimidation." Something inside me loosened. Just hearing another person confirm my reality steadied me. "Do you want me to stay with you tonight?" she asked. "Or I'll come over tomorrow and help you go through the rest of Daniel's things, whatever you need." It had been so long since someone offered help without an agenda that I almost cried. "I don't need you to fix anything," I said softly. "Just stay close." "I'm not going anywhere," Mary Ann replied. We talked for hours, slow, grounding conversation. She made tea. I let myself lean back into her sofa and breathe. The world felt clearer, less suffocating. By the time I went home, the fear was still there, but it no longer ran the show. When I parked in my driveway, the street was empty. No beige sedan, no shadows lurking. I locked the door behind me and walked through the quiet rooms. My house felt different now. Not safe, but fortified. Because I wasn't alone anymore. Because Lydia and her daughters had shown their tactics. Because now I understood the rules of their game. And I was learning how to play. The next few days passed quietly. Too quietly. The kind of stillness that made every creak of the house feel deliberate. Every shift of the wind sound like footsteps. Lydia and her daughters had backed off, at least on the surface. No more texts, no more cars parked outside, no more shadowy messengers at my door. But silence wasn't peace. Silence was planning. I kept telling myself that Sandra would handle whatever came next. I checked in with her every morning, updating her on the absence of contact, and each time she said the same thing. "Don't trust the quiet. It means they're recalculating." Recalculating. The word stayed with me. On Friday morning, a soft drizzle covered the neighborhood. I was washing dishes when I noticed a dark SUV pulling slowly into my driveway. My stomach tightened. The engine shut off. 2 doors opened. Lydia and Elise. Not knocking, not waiting. They were coming to me. Before I could react, the doorbell rang. One long, insistent ring. I dried my hands, forced my breathing to steady, and opened the door just a few inches. "We'd like to talk," Lydia said, her voice gentle in a way that didn't match her eyes. She wore a black wool coat, her makeup understated. Elise stood slightly behind her, hands folded, gaze lowered. A performance, both of them. "No," I said. "If you need something, speak to my attorney." Lydia tilted her head. "This isn't about attorneys. This is about family." That word again, wielded like a blade disguised as a ribbon. Before I could refuse again, Lydia lowered her voice. "We came to apologize." I froze. "Apologize?" She caught my reaction and offered a soft, almost maternal smile. "May we come in just for a few minutes?" A part of me screamed no, but another part, the part that needed to see what she had planned, knew this conversation was inevitable. better on my territory than theirs. I stepped aside. They walked in without gratitude. In the living room, Lydia removed her gloves, placing them neatly on her lap. Elise sat rigidly, eyes flicking around the room like she was cataloging every detail. I remained standing. "You said you wanted to apologize," I said. "Yes," Lydia replied smoothly. "I regret the intensity of our last visit. Grief makes people behave irrationally." I raised an eyebrow. "You threatened me." She smiled faintly. "A misunderstanding. Emotions were high. We recognize you were blindsided. We shouldn't have come unannounced. It was the kind of apology that wasn't an apology at all." "And the car outside my house?" I asked quietly. "Is that also grief?" Elise stiffened. Lydia's smile thinned. "Miscommunication," Lydia said. "Elise was worried about your well-being." Elise looked at me then, eyes wide, performing innocence. But the muscle in her jaw twitched, betraying her. "I'm not interested in performances," I said. "What do you really want?" Lydia finally dropped the softness. "We want assurance that you won't challenge our claim." There it was, the real agenda. I kept my voice steady. "What claim?" "Our place in Daniel's estate," she said calmly. "He supported us for years. We assumed that would continue. But since you've hired representation, things may become contentious." She leaned forward. "We want you to sign a statement acknowledging that Daniel had responsibilities beyond your household. It'll simplify everything." I stared at her, almost stunned by the brazenness. "You want me to sign something admitting your position in his life," I said slowly, "so you can leverage it legally." Lydia's smile widened. "If you see it that way." "I don't see it any other way." Elise crossed her arms tightly. "It's fair. Dad, Daniel, cared about us. He wouldn't have wanted you to shut us out." The slip, "Dad," hit the air like a fracture. They weren't pretending anymore. My pulse quickened. Fear crept up my spine, but it wasn't the kind that froze me. It was the kind that clarified everything. "You came into my home," I said, "to intimidate me into giving you legal leverage." "No," Lydia said softly. "We came to give you a chance to avoid a very public ordeal. Do you really want your community to know that the man you were married to for 40 years lived a double life? Do you want your sons to face that embarrassment?" A direct strike. I kept my expression unreadable. "My sons will survive the truth," I said. "Can you?" Lydia's eyes flashed with something sharp. Anger, fear, instability. The mask cracked. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, "a painful one." Elise stood abruptly. "We're trying to help you. Do you think you're the only one hurting?" Her voice trembled, not with grief, but fury. I stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but out of recognition. This wasn't reconciliation. This was pressure, a psychological ambush wrapped in silk. "I'm done," I said. "You need to leave." Lydia rose slowly, composing herself. "I want you to think carefully," she said. "Right now, you have a chance to end this before it destroys you." "I already survived the worst part," I replied softly, "finding out the truth. Everything else is manageable." Lydia studied me. Something shifted in her expression, the realization that I meant it. She picked up her gloves. Elise glared at me as she followed her mother. At the door, Lydia turned back one last time. "We'll be in touch. I hope you make the right choice." When they stepped outside, the air in the house transformed. I locked the door, leaning against it as my heartbeat slowly returned to normal. Fear crawled beneath my skin, but something stronger rose to meet it. Resolve. They weren't here to reconcile. They were here to frighten me into surrender. and the fact that they felt the need to pressure me told me something important. They were afraid too. After they left, I sat on the couch, breathing deeply. My hands still shook, but there was a steadiness beneath it. I picked up my phone and called Sandra. She answered on the first ring. "They came again," I said, this time pretending they wanted peace. Sandra sighed. Of course they did. It's a classic tactic. Intimidation disguised as grace. What did they ask for? I told her, every word, every veiled threat. "Well," Sandra said, "now we know they're desperate enough to break good sense. That's leverage for us, not them. Keep everything documented. I'll prepare the next move." After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. The house no longer felt the same, but neither did I. The fear remained, a constant hum, but it no longer controlled me. It fueled me, because if Lydia and her daughters believed they could manipulate me into surrendering, they didn't understand me at all. This wasn't a battle I chose, but now that it had begun, I wasn't stepping away. Not for them, not for Daniel's secrets, not even for the version of my life I once believed was real. I was fighting for my sons, for the truth, for myself, and I wasn't finished yet. The confrontation with Lydia and Elise left a strange stillness inside me, like the moment right before a storm breaks. Not fear, not fatigue, a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. They hadn't come for reconciliation. They had come because they sensed I was getting closer to something that threatened them enough to switch tactics twice in 3 days. And that meant I was on the right path. Over the next week, Sandra moved quickly. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound orderly, but the work behind it was anything but gentle. Subpoenas, requests, preliminary filings, all pointed at one goal: exposing Daniel's financial secrets. One afternoon, she called me into her office. The tone of her voice already told me she had something significant. When I arrived, she gestured for me to sit and slid a stack of documents across the desk. "Before we go any further," she said, "you need to see this." The pages were bank statements, but not Daniel's. They belonged to Lydia Mercer, and running through them, like a thread through fabric, were monthly deposits that matched Daniel's transfers exactly. But there was more. Among the deposits were payments labeled Child Support, EM, Child Support, S. 2 daughters, Elise and Sophie Mercer. Sophie. The second daughter I hadn't met. My breath caught. "So it's true," I whispered. "He was supporting 2 minors." Sandra nodded. "Yes, and here's the part you need to see." She flipped to the next page. There was a document, a paternity acknowledgement form notarized 17 years ago. Daniel Hunter, father, child, Elise Mercer. I sat back. The room felt too small. "But Elise is what, almost 30? I asked. 29, Sandra said. "Which means Daniel acknowledged paternity when she was 12. My stomach turned. For 16 years, he'd hidden an entire child, 2 children in another household. "But that's not everything," Sandra said. She tapped another page. "Look here." The second form, Sophie Mercer, Daniel Hunter, father, dated 11 years ago. The word swam. My husband had 2 daughters. 2 daughters, and he had kept them hidden from me for decades. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded distant. "Why is this coming out now?" "Because I filed for a full financial audit," Sandra said, and Lydia panicked. She tried to withdraw funds from her account, large amounts. When the bank flagged it as unusual activity, the documents surfaced. So she was afraid I'd find out. Sandra met my eyes. "She knew you would." I let out a long, slow breath. What happens next? I asked. We confront them formally, she said. We call for a joint meeting, legal representatives present. No more doorstep theatrics, no more unannounced visits, and we lay out the facts, publicly, in front of their lawyer. I nodded. A tremor of something, resolve, steel, ran through me. Set it up. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at a neutral office downtown. Sandra insisted we arrive early, and when we did, the building's lobby felt colder than it should have. Glass walls, polished floors, a receptionist with too bright lighting above her desk, a legal battlefield. We waited in a conference room, warm wood table, too many chairs, a pitcher of water no one touched. When the door opened, Lydia entered first, elegant, composed, but her eyes flickered with something brittle. Elise followed, tense, her jaw clenched. And behind them came a man in a navy suit, their real attorney, not the shadow figure Mark Whitfield. Sandra stood beside me, her posture relaxed but alert. "Thank you for meeting," Lydia's attorney said, sitting down. "Let's keep this civil." I almost laughed. Sandra placed a folder on the table. "We intend to." Lydia looked at me, really looked, and I noticed something new in her expression. Not confidence, not triumph, apprehension. Sandra spoke first. "Before we discuss any estate claims, we need clarity. There are documents you should all see." She opened the folder and slid the paternity forms across the table. Lydia's attorney lifted them. His expression changed almost immediately. "Lydia," he said quietly, "you didn't disclose this." Elise's face drained of color. "Mom," Lydia didn't speak. Sandra continued, her tone steady. "Mrs. Hunter was approached at the funeral with accusations about a second family. She was threatened in her own home. We now have proof that your family concealed 2 children fathered by Mr. Hunter. Proof that money was transferred secretly for years, and proof that you withheld these facts during initial communications." Elise glared at me. "You're making us out to be liars." Sandra didn't blink. "The documents speak for themselves." Lydia finally found her voice. "Daniel didn't want to destroy your family," she said weakly. "He kept us apart to protect everyone." I leaned forward, calm, colder than I'd ever felt. "And yet you came to my home to threaten me, to pressure me, to coerce me into admitting something I didn't even know was true." Lydia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her lawyer turned to her sharply. "Did you threaten her?" She didn't answer. Elise snapped. "We were trying to avoid this." Her voice cracked, and the slip of control echoed through the room. "No," I said softly. "You were trying to keep the truth buried. For your advantage." The attorney looked between them with growing frustration. "You told me Daniel supported you. You didn't tell me he acknowledged paternity. That changes everything, legally and financially. We cannot proceed until we know the extent of your concealment." Lydia's composure was unraveling. "We were afraid," she whispered. "All our lives we were kept in the shadows. Daniel said—" "Daniel is gone," I said quietly, "and now everything he hid is coming out." Elise slammed her hand on the table. "You don't get to judge us," Sandra replied before I could. "We're not judging you. We're presenting facts, facts that you tried very hard to hide." Elise looked at her mother, then back at me. The anger in her eyes wasn't strategic anymore. It was personal, raw, uncontrolled. "You think you're the victim?" she hissed. "You had the house, you had the life. We had nothing." I held her gaze. I had a lie. The room fell silent. Her attorney pressed his palms to the table. "We need a recess, now." He ushered Lydia and Elise out of the room. Their voices rose sharply in the hallway. Accusations, regrets, blame. They were fracturing. Sandra turned to me, her expression unreadable and proud. "You handled that perfectly," she said. Cold, precise, controlled. They didn't expect that. I exhaled slowly. My hands were steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Something final. The truth was no longer behind a door. It was out in the open, and they couldn't contain it. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. When the conference room door shut behind Lydia, Elise, and their attorney, the silence they left behind felt heavy, almost physical. Sandra poured me a glass of water, but my hands were steady enough that I didn't need it. Something inside me had shifted, hardened into place. The fear that had once rattled through me had burned away, replaced by a cold clarity. "They're unraveling," Sandra said, watching the empty doorway. "It's the beginning of the end for them." I believed her. For the next 10 minutes, muffled voices carried through the hallway, an argument unfolding like fabric tearing. Elise's voice rose first, sharp and panicked. Lydia's followed, lower, strained. Their attorney's tone was clipped, controlled, the voice of a man realizing he had been led into a case filled with hidden landmines. Sandra leaned back in her chair. "When they come back in," she said, "they'll have 2 priorities: minimizing liability and salvaging whatever credibility they can. Don't respond emotionally. Let them break themselves." I nodded. I can do that. Because I truly could. Something about watching their faces when the documents came out. It had shown me everything. Their confidence had always been built on secrecy, and now that secrecy was collapsing brick by brick. When the door finally opened, Lydia entered first, head lowered. Elise followed, but the fire in her eyes was dimmer now, confused, scared. Their lawyer came last, expression tightened by frustration. He cleared his throat and sat down. "Mrs. Hunter," he began formally, "my clients acknowledge that information relevant to this case was not disclosed to me before today. A sanitized way of saying they lied to their own attorney." Sandra didn't comment. She waited. The attorney continued. "Given the existence of paternity acknowledgments and years of undisclosed financial exchanges, any claim to Mr. Hunter's estate becomes significantly complicated." Elise looked up sharply. "Complicated? That's my father. How is that complicated?" Her attorney shot her a warning look, but she wasn't done. "You're supposed to defend us," she hissed. "I'm defending you," he said through clenched teeth. "But I can't defend omissions." Lydia finally lifted her gaze. "We didn't omit anything," she insisted weakly. "Daniel told us to keep everything private. He didn't want anyone to get hurt." Sandra answered this time, her voice cool. "He didn't want to get caught." Lydia flinched. The truth hit her harder than she expected. "We're not here to punish anyone," Sandra added. "We're here to protect my client's legal standing, and right now your actions, visiting her home, delivering threats, concealing documents, constitute harassment and attempted coercion." Their attorney stiffened. "We dispute that characterization." Sandra cut him off. "You can dispute it in court if you like. We have recordings, emails, timestamps, witness statements from the funeral, and home security logs confirming uninvited visits. A judge won't like the picture that paints." Lydia's face crumpled. Elise looked between all of us, lost. I watched them without emotion. This was the moment I had feared weeks ago, The moment everything shattered. But I wasn't the one shattering. Their attorney inhaled and folded his hands. Given the severity of the situation, my clients are prepared to withdraw any preliminary claim to Mr. Hunter's estate pending further review. Elise stood abruptly. "No, Mom, you promised." "Elise," the attorney snapped, "sit down." She didn't. She stared at me, eyes burning with a wounded fury. "You had everything," she said. "Everything he built, everything he loved, and we had scraps. You don't understand what that feels like." For the first time, I responded, not to defend myself, but to state a fact. "I had lies," I said quietly. "That's what I lived with, not privilege, not safety. Lies." Elise froze, breath shaking. Lydia reached for her daughter's sleeve, but Elise jerked away. "You said he'd protect us," Elise whispered. "You said we'd be okay." Her voice broke, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. The collapse of the story Lydia had fed her children for years. Daniel had been the center of their world, and now that he was gone, their world had no structure, no anchor, no honesty to cling to, only consequences. Their attorney gathered his papers. "We'll send a formal withdrawal within 48 hours, he said. "Additionally, we understand that Mrs. Hunter plans to file a restraining order. We won't contest it." I blinked. This was news. Sandra gave me a small nod, an instruction to remain silent. The control she had over the situation was absolute. The attorney stood. Lydia stood slowly beside him. Elise didn't move at first, but eventually she followed, shoulders shaking though she tried to hide it. At the door, Lydia paused. Her makeup was smudging. Her voice, when it finally came, cracked like old wood. "He loved us," she said. "Even if you hate hearing that, he did." I met her eyes with a calm that surprised me. "I don't hate hearing it," I said. "I hate that he lied to all of us." Her mouth opened, but no reply came. She lowered her gaze and stepped out into the hallway. Elise walked behind her, head bowed, hands trembling. The door closed softly. The storm was over. Sandra exhaled slowly, almost as if releasing the weight of the entire case. She turned to me. "Congratulations," she said. "That was a complete collapse on their side." I didn't smile. The victory felt different than I expected. Quiet, heavy, but necessary. "What happens now?" I asked. "We finalize the restraining order. We confirm the withdrawal. And we ensure they have no legal grounds to re-enter your life." She paused. "You won today." I nodded. "It doesn't feel like winning." "It will," she said gently. "Just give it time." When I stepped out of the office building, the late afternoon air felt sharper, cleaner. The sky was open. Cars passed lazily down the street. A woman walked her dog. 2 teenagers laughed loudly as they biked past. Life moved on, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could move with it. Not because the truth stopped hurting, but because I finally had control over my home, my future, my son's security, and the story that had once threatened to consume me. Sandra locked the truth in place. Lydia and her daughters had retreated, shattered from within, and I stepped forward, steady and unbroken. This was the end of their claim, the end of their power, and the beginning of my new life. The weeks after the legal meeting felt strangely weightless, as if someone had cut loose the anchors I had carried for most of my adult life. Not all the weight. Grief stayed, but the tension, the dread, the constant bracing for the next confrontation, that was gone. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, my mornings began without checking the driveway for unfamiliar cars. I woke without that cold drop of panic in my stomach. I made coffee at a normal pace again. I sat at the kitchen table and didn't feel watched. Sandra handled the final documents with efficient precision. The restraining order went through without objection. A formal withdrawal from Lydia's attorney arrived via certified mail. The envelope was thick, the contents brief. My clients retract all claims, immediate and future, against the estate of Daniel Hunter. No apology, no explanation, just surrender dressed in legal language. I placed the letter in a clean folder and felt something settle. An internal exhale I didn't realize I'd been holding. But freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with a triumphant swell of music. It comes quietly, like noticing one day that the house feels warm again. I spent the next month repairing parts of my life that had been frayed. I cleaned Daniel's study, not to erase him, but to reclaim the space. I boxed up the old receipts, sorted the documents, and, after a long pause, donated his business suits to a community center. There was no satisfaction in it, no spite, just necessity. Life needed room to continue. Michael and Trevor visited more often. They didn't know the full story. They knew only what was necessary. Sandra insisted that until the estate was completely settled, the fewer emotional complications, the better. And I agreed. But they sensed something had changed. "You seem lighter," Trevor said one evening while helping me fix a loose gutter. "I guess I am," I answered. He looked at me for a moment. Dad would want that. I didn't reply. Some truths were too heavy to lay on him. Instead, I rested my hand briefly on his arm. That was enough. As spring approached, I returned to small routines, walking the neighborhood, tending to the fading winter plants in the backyard, visiting Marianne for coffee. These were things I had done for years, but now they felt different. Mine. Chosen. Unshadowed. Marianne watched me prune a rose bush one morning and shook her head. "I knew you'd come out stronger," she said. "People like Lydia only win when you let them crawl into your fear." "I almost let them," I admitted. "But you didn't." It wasn't pride she offered, just recognition. Sometimes recognition is more healing than praise. The decline of Lydia and her daughters unfolded quietly, almost politely, as though life itself had decided to rebalance the scales without drama. I didn't seek out information, but small pieces found their way to me through neighbors, old acquaintances of Daniel's, and even Sandra, who always phrased updates like neutral observations. One afternoon, Sandra called with a tone that told me the news wasn't harmful, just relevant. "I thought you should know," she said. "Lydia's landlord filed a notice. They were behind on rent, several months." I said nothing. "And Elise," she continued, "left her job, or was asked to leave. It's unclear. But they've moved out of their previous residence." "Where to?" "Unknown, but not affluent." A shift, a consequence. Not because I wanted them punished, but because a life built on deception collapses the moment the truth is spoken aloud. A few weeks later, I ran into an old friend of Daniel's at the farmer's market. He hesitated before telling me. "I saw Lydia at a discount store. She looked worn out, frail." It didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring guilt either. Just a strange, quiet ache. A reminder that everyone in this ordeal had lost something, even if their losses were the result of their own choices. My sons never asked about Lydia or the rumors around the funeral. Maybe they suspected. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they chose their version of events to protect themselves, and I respected that. Life doesn't require full disclosures to be real. Sometimes silence is a boundary. One evening we gathered for a simple dinner. Pasta, salad, bread I baked earlier in the day. The kind of dinner that once felt ordinary but now felt like a ritual of reclamation. Michael poured wine, Trevor set the plates, and as they talked about work, I watched them with a quiet gratitude. They were steady, whole, unbroken. I fought for them without telling them the battlefield existed. That was enough. My own life began to stretch into new territory. I took long drives with no destination. I joined a local book club. I started volunteering twice a week at the community kitchen. These small steps weren't symbolic. They were practical, grounding, moving outward again after months of compression. I learned that healing is rarely dramatic. It's a slow stitching of the days back together. One afternoon, while sitting in the backyard with a cup of tea, I realized I wasn't thinking about Daniel at all. Not about the betrayal, not about Lydia, not about the lies. I was thinking about the garden, new soil, the scent of rosemary, the angle of sunlight against the fence. It felt like stepping into a new room, one with open windows and air that didn't taste like memory. Sandra called one last time to confirm that all pending documents were finalized. "It's official," she said. "Everything is closed." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." "You did the hard part," she replied. And maybe I had, not surviving the truth, but choosing what to do with it. I sat on the porch as the sun slid behind the trees, the sky warm with gold and lavender. The world didn't look different, but I did. I wasn't the woman who froze at a funeral. I wasn't the woman who trembled at a knock on the door. I wasn't the woman trying to hold together a marriage built on lies. I was someone new, someone honest, someone free. Some wounds don't heal by forgetting. They heal by understanding, by refusing to carry what was never yours. And as the evening birds settled in the branches above, their quiet calls drifting across the yard, I knew with absolute certainty my life had begun again. And now I want to ask you something directly. If you discovered after 40 years of marriage that the person you loved had lived a secret life, what would you do? Would you walk away quietly, fight for the truth, confront the ones who tried to erase you? I hope you'll tell me in the comments. Your thoughts matter more than you know. If you want more stories like this, raw, honest, tangled with real human choices, make sure to follow the channel. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. We survive by telling our stories together.